warm welcome. You're watching this special broadcast here on my YouTube station, Smita Sharma, journalist. It's 7th of October 2025, and 2 years ago, the world witnessed a brutal terror attack in Israel, which was carried out by Hamas that killed at least 1,200 people. Several hundred were wounded, several were taken hostages. Now, since then, the world has seen a war that has absolutely shaken us to our core. We have seen the Israeli military action, nothing short of genocidal action, that has killed at least 66,000 Palestinians. The numbers keep increasing, and at least half of them are reportedly women, young children, and babies. So what's really the end game for this war? Donald Trump, the US president, has proposed a latest peace plan, a 20-point peace plan, which is different from his other peace plans in some ways. And even as we are doing this show, there are indirect talks that are being held in Egypt, in the city of Sharm el-Sheikh, to try and pave way for this agreement to come into force. To try and discuss all of these issues and understand, I have a special guest with me here, Dr. Stanley Johny, who is the International Affairs Editor for The Hindu, prolific writer, author of several important books, including Original Sin, which came out last year during the first anniversary, in fact, of the start of this war. Very important read. Thank you so much, Stanley, for joining me here in this live conversation.
Thanks, Smita. Thanks for having me. Glad to be back.
And also to all our viewers who are joining in on the streaming platforms, if you have questions for Stanley, please drop them in the chat box and I will include them over the next 40 minutes or so. Stanley, first of all, if I could start by asking you, we saw that horrific terror attack on October 7, and that definitely shouldn't have happened. We can only hope that the hostages who are still alive, they are reunited with their families. How did the October 7 terror attacks change Israel, the world? What are your thoughts today, 2 years since that?
So for Israel, yes, definitely it was a shocking attack because Israel hadn't seen this kind of an attack since 1948 within Israel proper. Because Israel had seen terror attacks definitely in the past by Hamas and other attacks by other Palestinian militants. But the scale of the attack and also the fact that the attack took place within the 1967 boundaries. So this was kind of a shock, and the Israelis never expected this kind of an attack to take place, because I remember talking to the Israelis just a few months before October 7, 2023, that they all looked very confident. They thought that Gaza can be managed. In West Bank, they could continue the occupation without any major consequences. They had built this underground walls, overland walls, and unmanned surveillance posts, and they believed in the supremacy of their own technology, their own military intelligence power. So they thought that, okay, Hamas would fire occasionally, Hamas would fire rockets into Israel, but we have the Iron Dome missile defense system, so we could manage Hamas. So we can continue the occupation, we can continue to control the Palestinian territories. But October 7 basically shattered the sense of security the Israelis had enjoyed despite the continuing occupation of the Palestinian territories. And ever since October 7, see, Israel's attack was vengeful, right? I mean, now there is pretty much, we've been talking about this for quite some time. Now there is an international consensus that Israel is carrying out a genocidal war against the Palestinians. I mean, not just me. Most of the genocide scholars in the world say Israel is committing genocide. There is a UN independent inquiry commission whose findings also say that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians. And we know the numbers, 67,000 people were killed in just 2 years. And almost the entire population of Gaza Strip has been displaced, which is 2.3 million people. And 1.5 lakh people have been displaced, which is roughly 6% of Gaza's population. And Gaza is also now undergoing a famine, according to the UN. And children are dying, due to starvation, malnutrition. And British doctors who served in Gaza came back and told British television, including in Piers Morgan show, the horrors that they had witnessed. Children were shot in their head, in their chest, in their testicles. There was a doctor who said that he had to do a C-section on a dead body, at least to save the child. So you have all these horrific stories coming out of Gaza. But the critical question here is that Israel's narrative, okay, we are journalists, we should understand both versions. Israel's narrative is that Israel hadn't seen this kind of an attack. And Hamas poses a very serious challenge to Israel. So Israel says that it wants to continue to fight until it meets its objective. And its objective is to dismantle Hamas. But the question here is that after 2 years of fighting, after turning Gaza into dust, into rubble, after killing these many people, did you meet your objective? Did you defeat Hamas? No, Hamas is far from being destroyed. So there has to be basically, and also the war Israel has fought a multi-front war, right? Not only in Gaza, but also in the region. Israel is bombing Lebanon, Israel has bombed Syria, Israel is bombing Yemen, Israel has bombed Iran, and then Israel has bombed even Qatar, which was the principal negotiator between Israel and Hamas. And is this making Israel more secure? This is the fundamental question that Israel is facing. Over the last 2 years, is Israel feeling more secure? Is Israel meeting its military objectives? I would argue that no, it doesn't. On the other side, Israel stands internationally isolated, facing serious, grave allegations.
I actually spoke to Ambassador Tirumurthy, who was the former Indian envoy to the United Nations, and that conversation will be up on my YouTube station later this evening. He's somebody who has been writing in The Hindu, and he writes with a lot of empathy for the issue. But there's an interesting contrary argument that he makes. He says that the fact that Israel is actually being able to carry out these attacks, whether it's against Hezbollah, Hamas, ideologically stays strong, organizationally has definitely been weakened. The fact that it can take a strike to Qatar, even if it is asked to apologize, it's because Netanyahu today has actually become stronger in the last 2 years with this war. And he knows that he can get away with a lot of things compared to the initial window after that October 7 terror attack, because at the end of the day, that huge, massive intelligence failure happened under his watch.
Correct. See, Netanyahu, I talk to Ambassador Tirumurthy quite often. Mostly I agree with his arguments. So here, one important point that we should discuss along with this argument is that Netanyahu is able to carry out these attacks not only because he feels stronger, but also because he has the support of the United States. He has the very strong support of the United States. And just take the case of Iran, for example. So Netanyahu carried out the attack when the Iranians were in talks with the Americans, and they were supposed to meet for their 6th round of talks. And then Israel bombs Iran on June 13th, basically practically torpedoing, sabotaging President Trump's diplomatic initiative. And what was the American response? The American response was to join the war, not to reprimand Netanyahu, because Netanyahu was basically sabotaging Trump's diplomatic initiative. But still, what the United States actually did, it's true that the United States didn't drag it into an all-out conflict, but still, they joined the war, they bombed the nuclear facilities, they declared victory and pulled back. So this American support is very pivotal for Israel, because as long as the United States stands solidly behind Israel, because even the surrounding Arab countries are not able to do anything much, And another example is that, yes, Qatar, Netanyahu feels empowered because of the impunity he enjoyed, right? Because Iran, he got away with Iran, and he is able to bomb all the neighboring countries. And we should also understand that all these neighboring countries he's attacking, they are not able to militarily stand up to Israel. Only Iran retaliated. So Israel doesn't face any major military threat coming in from these countries. But at the same time, you compare today's Israel's strategic situation with that of pre-October 7. Let's just look at the October 7 situation in West Asia. Right? The Abraham Accords were in place. 4 Arab countries had already normalized ties with Israel. And the United States wanted to bring Israel and the Arab countries closer. That was the whole idea of the Abraham Accords. Trump brokered the Abraham Accords, and the Biden administration wanted to expand this. Saudi Arabia was in a very advanced stage of normalizing ties with Israel. And Saudi Crown Prince said this in as many words when he was in Delhi for the G20 summit in September 2023. So Israel was seen as a new security provider. And who was the villain? The villain was Iran, because both the Arab countries and the Israelis saw Iran as a potential challenge, as a potential threat. So when the United States was deprioritizing West Asia because it was shifting its focus away from the region, it had to focus on China and other issues in Europe, etc., etc. The United States saw that Israel can play a much bigger security role. Israel can play a much bigger security role in the region. And the Arabs were okay with that. And there were also bigger projects in the making, because, for example, you look at the IMEC, India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. The whole idea of the India, Middle East Economic Corridor was to reshape the region, placing Israel at the center of the region, because Israel would play a central role when the region is economically remade. And India has been pulled into this project. India was very hot on the IMEC project. And you had I2U2, India, the UAE, Israel, and the United States. So again, India is expected to play a much bigger economic and political role in the region, along with Israel, along with the Arabs and the United States. So pre-October 7, Abraham Accords were in place, and Abraham Accords were expected to be expanded. Major economic initiatives were being unleashed. There was a new economic grouping, bringing in Israel, India, the UAE, the United States together. So there was a very concerted effort to reshape the region diplomatically, putting Israel at the center of it. You look at now, where does Israel stand today? Internationally isolated. Saudi Arabia is no longer in a position to normalize ties with Israel. Okay, it might happen sometime in the future. I'm not saying it won't happen at all, but it's not going to happen immediately at all. The Saudis, on the other side, are diversifying their security calculus. They have now signed a mutual defense pact with the Pakistanis. They don't look at Israel as a security provider. Rather, ties with Israel is seen as a liability in the kingdom now. The UAE, which enjoys very close relationship with Israel, the UAE, which is also part of the I2U2, UAE now says that if Israel annexes West Bank, which is a big demand from Israel's far right, people like Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, UAE says that that would be a red line, that UAE could even walk out of the Abraham Accords if that happens, right? And then look at the after effects of both the Iran attack and the Qatar attack. So Iran attack, yes, Israel carried out the attack in Iran, but did Israel destroy Iran's nuclear facilities, even with American support? They haven't. There are no evidence to suggest that Israel has destroyed Iran's nuclear facilities, and the Iranian regime survived. There are now talks about another round of an Iran war, both in the United States and Israel today, only because Israel did not meet its objectives in the first Iran war. And look at the Qatar war. I think President Trump is now trying to strong-arm Netanyahu, arm twist him into accepting his plan. Despite Hamas not committing to the entirety of the plan, Trump actually wants Netanyahu to stop bombing because he made a public announcement. It's because of the...
I was going to ask you this, Stanley, because, at the end of the day, I think even if the other Arab countries that you mentioned that Israel was kind of on a path to normalizing relations with, all of that has gone down the drain in the last 2 years itself. With Donald Trump, the Abraham Accords happened during Donald Trump's first term. Within the Trump administration and with Trump itself, I know he's pressurizing both Hamas and Israel at this point in time. He has even just commented he seems to be exuding optimism like he always does with his plans. He has just told reporters at the White House that we have a really good chance of making a deal and it will be a lasting deal. But you think if Netanyahu were not to play along, would there really be some sort of action against him from the US, or will they again just allow him a free pass at the end of the day?
Yeah, history is against this. History is against any kind of hope that the United States will crack the whip on the Israeli Prime Minister. But it's interesting that Trump is now showing the kind of resolve which other American presidents had not done. Because I think Trump is increasingly frustrated and tired of the war, which is happening in Gaza now and also in the region. And the attack on Qatar, I think, was some kind of a red line for the Americans as well, because Qatar is a very important ally for the United States. Qatar hosts America's largest military base. And it is still possible, I always argued that it is still possible that the Pentagon or the American military defense establishment might have coordinated with the Israelis, or the Israelis may have informed the Americans in the last minute about the attack. But Trump appeared to be visibly rattled by what happened in Qatar. So that's why he made Netanyahu apologize to the Qatari PM. And then he also demanded, you look at the Trump plan. The Trump plan in its entirety is unworkable. There is no doubt about it. We can discuss this in detail. But still, Trump wanted to basically wanted to bring in peace, ceasefire, and then he wanted Hamas to demobilize itself, put Gaza under an international administration and an international force to be deployed in Gaza for security. And he wants all this to be done while at the same time Israel will maintain security presence in Gaza. And Hamas's response was interesting. It was very clever because Hamas did not commit to the later part of the proposal. But Hamas said that we are willing to release the hostages if there is a ceasefire. But Trump knows that Hamas has not accepted his proposal. But at the same time,
particularly to disarm itself.
Yeah, exactly. And Hamas is not going to disarm itself. I mean, not as part of any diplomatic agreement. Okay, Israel might want to defeat them militarily, destroy them, etc., but not as part of a diplomatic agreement. But then Trump's response to Hamas's proposal was that I read Hamas's proposal, and they seem like serious about peace in the region. And then he says Israel has to stop bombing Gaza immediately. He wrote that on social media, and which was very interesting. And there were also interesting reports that came out in Axios. Trump gave an interview to Axios in which Trump said Netanyahu doesn't have a choice. With him, with me, he has got a choice, but otherwise he doesn't have a choice. So he has to take this. And he also said that he apparently in a very intense telephone conversation with Netanyahu, Trump told him, "You are always effing negative." So you can see the friction. But does this mean that if Netanyahu walks out of an agreement, he might always find a chance to walk out of ceasefire? Will the United States be able to, hold him accountable? I am not sure. I mean, we will have to wait and see that because Israel still maintains enormous influence in the United States, in the White House and in the Capitol. And in all the public posturing, the United States still stands solidly with Israel. They continue to spend billions of dollars in defending Israel, in providing offensive weapons to Israel, in providing diplomatic support to Israel, in providing economic support to Israel. So you don't see any break, but you only see some frictions. But the friction is actually widening. And also you look at the public opinion in the United States, even on the right wing, on the right side of the spectrum. People are increasingly turning out to be critical. You listen to Tucker Carlson's recent show in which he was interviewing Jeffrey Sachs. And Tucker is not a left-wing loony, right? He's a right-winger. He is a Trump supporter. And he has launched a 25 minutes non-stop attack on Israel and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And he's saying that the Israeli government is trying to control the American government, a foreign military, a foreign government. So, this shift is not going to work well for the Israelis, definitely. So you can see some kind of friction. But if you are asking me whether this is going to lead to an immediate break in the relationship, whether the United States would actually punish Israel if Netanyahu walks out of the ceasefire, it may not happen immediately.
The other thing which was interesting in that conversation with Ambassador Tirumurti is that he says that within Israel, while you do see these protests happening every now and then to end the war, people coming out on the streets, but that it's essentially, to deal more to ensure that the hostages come back. There are 48 hostages reportedly with Hamas, of which 20 are believed to be still alive. But beyond that, he agrees that we have actually seen a much, much more harder and harsher Israel today, with the newer generations now considering Palestinians as the complete equivalent of Hamas and terrorists. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I more or less agree with him because I think the protests are more to do with the hostages, definitely. Israelis want the hostages to be released. They are, you don't see any massive protests in Israel demanding an end to the war. And also you look at the polling numbers. Haaretz had come up with multiple polls, and in which a vast majority of the Israelis believe that the Palestinians should be evicted from Israel, which was shocking to me. A vast majority. In one poll suggests that 80% of the participants of the poll said that the Palestinians should be expelled from Gaza. And I was also talking to a diplomat the other day who believes that it is likely that if there are elections, the Likud party could still emerge as the single largest party. He's not saying that Netanyahu will come back to power, but he says that it is possible that Likud will still retain majority. And also, if you look at Israel's internal political dynamics, so there is clearly Israel now, historically speaking, Israel had this center-left liberal secular Zionist parties, like Labour Party was there and other secular parties were there. Labour is finished. Labour has only some 7 MKs in the current parliament, 7 or 8 MKs in the parliament. Israel's main opposition is Yesh Atid of Yair Lapid party or Benny Gantz Blue and White party. Both are center-right parties. And Netanyahu's main allies are this. He has 2 kind of allies. So Likud is clearly a right-wing party. And then he has 2 types of allies. One is the religious Orthodox parties like Shas or United Torah Judaism. Or he has this far-right settlement parties like Bezalel Smotrich's party or Itamar Ben-Gvir's party. So you look at Israel's political composition. It's far-right, it's religious right, it's right-wing, it's center-right. And among these politicians, at least someone who is still willing to talk about a diplomatic solution is Yair Lapid. But even Yair Lapid says that he will continue to back the Netanyahu government, even if the right-wing politicians pull out, because he wanted the hostages to be released. So Yair Lapid is also not demanding that the war should be over. They are not worried about the allegations of genocide. I was also listening to the former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's interview in the Piers Morgan show just a couple of weeks ago. Naftali Bennett doesn't like Netanyahu. He is critical of Netanyahu, but he is a much more vocal supporter of the war than even the Prime Minister. So clearly, you look at Israel's political factions. I don't see any concrete opposition towards the violence Israel is committing, the allegations Israel is facing, or I don't think that they are too much worried about Israel's international isolation, the case in the ICJ, or the arrest warrant by the ICC, etc., because they all believe that they can continue the war. And they more or less wanted to continue the whole of historical Palestine, which includes today's Palestinian territories, which means West Bank and Gaza. Because, everybody, for example, Yair Lapid supports the Gaza plan, Trump's Gaza plan. But even he doesn't say that the IDF should withdraw from Gaza. Everybody believes that IDF because for the last,
it's not really about Hamas agreeing to disarming. At the end of the day, it's the Israelis themselves. They are not interested in a way to end this war. There's so much at stake for Netanyahu personally when it comes to his domestic political survival the moment this war ends.
Exactly.
So, how far can the United States in this case and Trump in this case then press? Everybody's expressing a sense of cautious optimism. But even does US have an appetite to continue pressing on both of them to come to the table?
I think the initial, everybody was praising Trump, from Pakistani Prime Minister to Indian Prime Minister to Egyptian
he's always
President.
the first one to praise. So now.
Right. I was wondering why should the Indian Prime Minister always praise the leadership of the US President every time there is some development in the Middle East. Anyway, that's a different subject. But still, everybody was praising. I think that is purely because of diplomatic reasons. And maybe everybody is trying to learn the art of pleasing or appeasing the man in the White House because he likes to be pleased, right? But rather than that, if you look at the terms of the agreement, let's say that there is a possibility for a ceasefire, There is, I think, clearly a possibility for a ceasefire because Hamas says that it is willing to release all the hostages. Hamas was earlier saying that it would release hostages in batches, in phases, but now they say that they are ready to release all the 51 hostages, including roughly 31 people are already dead, believed to be dead. Only 21 are alive. And Israel will release some 1,700 Palestinian prisoners. And Israel also ready, at least as of now, to stop bombing Gaza. But Hamas initially was demanding a complete withdrawal of the IDF from Gaza. Hamas is not saying that now for a ceasefire. Hamas still wants IDF to be withdrawn from Gaza as part of a final peace agreement, but not for a ceasefire. So Israeli troops will remain. They will basically withdraw to the initial withdrawal line, which means they will keep parts of Rafah in the south. They will keep parts of Han Yunis in the south, and then a buffer zone in the north. So Philadelphia corridor in the south and Netzarin corridor in the north, and a strip of land in between, a coastal strip of land in between, will continue to remain under the Israeli control. Okay, so Israeli troops would be there, but Israeli troops would stop fighting, active fighting, and Hamas will also stop fighting. And in the event of a ceasefire, hostages will be released, prisoners will be released. This is a real possibility now. But if you talk about the next phase of the Trump plan, see, Trump wants Hamas to be demobilized. Israel also wants Hamas to be demobilized. As you pointed out, the Israelis are interested in complete destruction of Hamas. But they fought for that for the last 2 years. They haven't met that. Hamas is still there. Okay, Hamas's military capabilities have been diminished or damaged, but Hamas has originally been founded as an insurgency, Islamist insurgency. And they are basically going back to their original avatar. They continue to fight from the rubble, right? So Hamas is there. Hamas is still there in Gaza. Israel wants to resolve the Hamas problem, and Trump wants Hamas to demobilize itself. But Hamas is not willing to do that. How are you going to address this question? And Hamas says that it will relinquish power. Hamas is open to that. That is a possibility to advance the negotiations. But who will come to rule the Palestinians? According to the Trump plan, an international governance agency, which will comprise mostly Palestinian technocrats, would be established to rule Gaza. And this agency would be overseen by an international board of peace. And the board of peace would be chaired by President Trump. And Tony Blair, of all the people, Tony Blair, the main architect of the Iraq war, who destroyed Iraq completely, and Tony Blair would be one of the members of the board of peace. So effectively, we are talking about some kind of a colonial administration in Gaza. Are the Palestinians going to accept
I have been
this?
trying to wrap my head around this. I mean, why would they come in with Tony Blair of all people?
Yeah. So apparently, Tony Blair and Jared Kushner, who's also Trump's son-in-law, were the main authors of the Trump plan. Trump took heavily from a plan authored by Blair and Kushner, and then Steve Witkoff joined in. And then they presented this as the 21-point peace plan. And the 21st point was that Netanyahu has to apologize to the Qataris. And Netanyahu has already apologized to Qataris, so it became the 20-point plan now. So the problem here is that the first phase is implementable. But you go to the next phase. Are the Palestinians going to accept a board of peace? Are the Palestinians going to accept an international stabilization force in Gaza? And which all countries are going to contribute to this international stabilization force? The Qataris, the Pakistanis, the Egyptians, the Saudis? I don't know. I'm just asking. We don't know. And until when the international stabilization force are going to be implemented in Gaza, are going to be present in Gaza? They say that until the reforms of the Palestinian Authority are completed. But who is going to reform the Palestinian Authority, and who is going to oversee the reforms of the Palestinian Authority, and who's going to say what kind of reforms the Palestinian Authority are going to undertake? And when all these developments are expected to take place, Israeli force will continue to stay in Gaza. So that's why I'm saying the Trump plan in its entirety is unworkable. But everybody is praising this because they all want to tell the king that you are great, your plan is great.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of appeasement that's going on right now amid all the tariff wars that has been unleashed by Donald Trump, it's like humanity is just taken such a back seat. Finally, you've seen some countries wake up and recognize Palestine as an independent state, but it's just too little, too late. And it comes at a time when you're looking at these images, neighborhood after neighborhood flattened out in Gaza. Just go back and compare the images pre-October 2023. I mean, do people really believe that every single of these houses here was actually housing members of Hamas, that every Palestinian is some sort of a terrorist? People really need to ask themselves these questions. But even in terms of the hostage swap that we are talking about, which is a part of it, there, if you see again, I do believe that every single Israeli hostage needs to come back home. My heart goes out with the families who have been separated. But the hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, even if the 1,700 Palestinian prisoners mentioned are released, Israel will continue with impunity to kill Palestinians, to bomb Palestinians, and to continue to imprison them. I mean, we've seen the bombings happen even when Donald Trump was announcing and asking Israel to not bomb Palestinians. Exactly.
That's the main question here. Who's going to hold Israel accountable? There is an arrest warrant against the Prime Minister and the former Defense Minister by the International Criminal Court. Who's going to implement that? Are the European countries going to do that? Because most of the European countries have signed up to the ICC convention. And there is the UN Independent Inquiry Commission says Israel is committing genocide. And genocide is the gravest of the international crimes. Gravest of the international crimes. Russia has been bombing Ukraine since 2022, and the whole of the West has imposed sanctions on Russia, which is fine. I've been saying that, which is fine, because Europe has its own legitimate security concerns. But when it comes to Israel, you don't even see a proper criticism of what Israel is doing. And what Israel is doing is many times worse than what the Russians are doing in Ukraine. So
just the shying away from using the word genocide. World leaders shying away and trying their best to not use the word. Ironically, Stanley, when Hamas put out that acceptance sort of a statement to some elements, they actually put in, it's a very smartly worded statement in a sense that they put in the word genocide in it, which ended up being retweeted by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. This world shying away from calling a spade, it just speaks volumes about where we stand today as humanity.
Exactly. That's the whole point. And Trump himself said that Netanyahu has gone too far in Gaza and he has lost a lot of support. And with this plan, I am going to win them all the support back. So the Trump plan basically seeks to reaccommodate Israel after what Israel did to the Palestinians in Gaza.
Right. Yeah. So finally here, just Stanley, to ask you, in terms of what happens next, I mean, those indirect talks are happening in Egypt. What's the kind of timeline that we are looking at right now? Because earlier this year also, we saw similar attempts at having a 3-phase ceasefire that didn't hold through. What is the kind of timeline that will be important to watch out for here during this ongoing process?
So the 20-point plan doesn't specify any timeline. That is the biggest drawback of the plan. But Trump says that a ceasefire is possible in the next 72 hours or something. He said that he held talks with multiple world leaders. He also said that he was constantly in touch with Erdogan, the Turkish president, who is in touch with the Turks who is in touch with Hamas through Qatar. And Trump also has excellent ties with the Qataris. And as far as we know that, at least when it comes to a ceasefire, Trump is now strong-arming Netanyahu. He said that publicly. He said that in the telephone conversation to the Israeli Prime Minister. So I think, there is always a chance for the talks to collapse, but still, that's what we witnessed over the past 2 years. But I think there is a possibility for an immediate ceasefire, which could happen maybe in a matter of days, as part of which Hamas could release all the hostages, which is great news, and the Israelis to release the Palestinian prisoners. But the problem will persist because in the next phase, all these questions will come up. Because Hamas Hamas would be willing to relinquish power, but Hamas would want a Palestinian government to be in place in Gaza. So the Palestinian government could be headed by all the Palestinian factions, including the PLO, the Fatah party, and Hamas would like to be a part of it. They might not want to be in the driving seat, but as a Palestinian movement, they would like to be part of that. The Americans would not accept that. The Israelis will never accept that. But Hamas would also, I think, make it a demand that if for them to relinquish power, to hand powers to a new Palestinian government, they would demand Israel to withdraw completely from Gaza. And that's not going to happen, at least as long as Netanyahu remains the prime minister. Because the Israeli point of view, or the IDF point of view, is that they also took losses. They have been fighting this war for the last 2 years. And they faced all kinds of allegations. And for what? And to withdraw from Gaza without even defeating Hamas? So that's not acceptable for the Israelis. So the problem here is that and I'm not even talking about the other proposals of the plan, including establishing this international government, international stabilization force, etc., etc. But even in the implementation stage in second phase, the plan could run into trouble. So Netanyahu might be hoping that even if he agrees to a ceasefire and he will get the hostages back, and he can always go back into fighting. So the possibility we are staring at is that, okay, we could have a ceasefire, and we had a ceasefire in November 2023. We had another ceasefire in Jan 2025. That ceasefire lasted until March, right? So there is a possibility for a ceasefire, but there is the chance for a peace agreement is very slim.
And I think that's the biggest worry, that, what Israel says, it cannot be taken in good faith. They have proved themselves wrong again and again and again by making these
Exactly. In
statements
March,
in
it was
public.
Israelis who defied the ceasefire, who breached the ceasefire in March, not Hamas. The ceasefire negotiations were expected to go into phase 2, and Netanyahu just pulled out.
Final question then, Stanley. I mean, from Hamas's point of view, how long do you think they can continue with this war, given that they have been hit quite badly, whether it's them or whether it's Hezbollah, and that Iranian support too right now has, of course, become visibly shaky and weakened. This, and then I'll ask the last question after this.
So, see, with Hamas, so the problem Israel faces when it comes to dealing with Hamas is that I always trying to distinguish Hamas. Okay, Hamas is an Islamist militant group. There's no doubt about it. And they had used terror as a means. They used it on October 7th. They had used it in the past. In early 2000s, Hamas used to carry out this bus bombing, suicide bombings inside Israel. So they used all kind of violence. Like the Israeli army, they also used all kind of violence against civilians on the other side. And Hamas had done the same thing. But the difference between Hamas and the transnational terrorist organizations is that when it comes to ISIS and Al-Qaeda, Israel always compares Hamas with ISIS, Al-Qaeda, etc., etc. When it comes to ISIS, Al-Qaeda, these were organizations that were superimposed on the local masses by their leaders. They are transnational organizations that wanted to establish some kind of an Islamic emirate, right, across the world. But Hamas is rooted, it has grown out of the Palestinian nationalism. It is deeply rooted in Palestinian society. Hamas has a political cause, which other organizations do not have. And Hamas is not a transnational group that goes around the world and carries out the attack. Hamas's logic is that they are a Palestinian national movement, and they continue to use violence for the liberation of the Palestinians because they continue to fight against the occupation of the Palestinian territories by the Israelis. So the political cause, I think, is important here. As a social scientist, as a student of IR, or a journalist, when we try to understand Hamas's tactics, I think we should also understand, we should basically distinguish its character from other fundamentalist extremist organizations. So as long as the political cause remains, it is difficult to eliminate Hamas. And I mean, you ask the Americans about how did they fight 20 years in Afghanistan. The Americans are, they don't lack any military capabilities, right? They are the world's most powerful country. And they were in Afghanistan for 20 years. And what happened after that? So when it comes to insurgencies, the problem is that, okay, you might believe in your own military might, but when it comes to insurgencies that are blunted in the local population and that have a political cause, that has nationalism to power their ideology, it is difficult to eliminate them. You can diminish their military capabilities, you can decapitate them, you can damage their militant infrastructure, and Israel has done all that to Hamas. Israel has killed its top leadership. Israel has successfully diminished Hamas's militant and governance administrative structures in Gaza. But Israel has not defeated Hamas in Gaza. So this is the problem.
Just the final question, Stanley, if you could tell us briefly. On the Indian stance, you, me, we belong to that section who have been criticizing New Delhi's changing stance, and which is driven a lot by its increased strategic proximity to the Israeli government, especially under the Modi government here. India should have done a lot more on Palestine these last 2 years.
I think India should have taken a much stronger position here. Considering India's standing in the global south, considering India's historical position here. But what India has done is that, yes, India hasn't abandoned the Palestinian cause, definitely not. India continued to support the Palestinian cause at the UN. Even in the latest vote that India supported, India voted in favor of the Palestinians at the UN. But at the same time, we are very wary when it comes to criticizing Israel. So we don't want to, basically India keeps a very good, strong relationship with Israel, and India doesn't want to do that. I think There are strategic reasons and there are also ideological reasons behind it, because if you just look at the government supporters, generally, anecdotally, everybody is strong Israel supporters as well. But the question here is that is this support being helpful for India from a foreign policy point of view? Is Israel's militarism helping India advance its interests in the region? The answer is no. I'm talking not only about the Palestinian issue. The Palestinian issue is definitely there. Israel is being isolated. Israel is being accused of genocide. The vast majority of the international community has turned against Israel. So it would not look good for India if India is seen standing together with Israel. That's one point. But secondly, you look at the way Israel is behaving in the region. Israel went and bombed Iran. Israel went and bombed Qatar. And any explosion of this conflict, spillover of this conflict into the Gulf is not in India's interest. Iran is a critical partner for India. And Qatar is 800,000 Indians are living in Qatar. You look at India's response to the Qatari attack. The MEA initially expressed concern about the attack. And I think the Qataris were upset, furious. And the Emir talked to the Prime Minister. And immediately thereafter, the Prime Minister tweeted saying that India condemns. The Prime Minister himself used the word, India condemns the violation of the sovereignty of the state of Qatar. That was a pretty strong statement, even though India did not name Israel, because we usually condemn terror attack. We don't condemn acts by other countries. We seldom do it unless it is carried out by Pakistan or countries with which we had very, bad ties. But India condemned the Israeli attack without naming Israel. And then and then India also signed up with other statements by SCO or BRICS countries, where again India condemns strongly Israel's attacks against Qatar and Iran. So we are trying to balance basically, but I think at the same time it's important to realize that Israel's militarism is not serving India's interest. Standing with Israel is not serving India's interest in the global south. So India should have taken a much more vocal, stronger, solid position like other members in the global south. And India should also stand for stability in West Asia. India should clearly oppose Israel's unchecked militarism in the region, which is not serving India's interests at all.
Right. Thank you so much, Stanley Johny. I mean, you spoke clearly and, great insights out there. And at the end of the day, I think all of us are really hoping that if there is even a ray of hope to be offered to the Palestinians, that should go through. Because what has happened with Gaza, what has been happening with Palestine, that's absolutely horrible, tragic. And if people don't feel for them, then humanity is dead. At the same time, we can also hope that the circumstances are created for the return of the Israeli hostages to their respective families. But thank you so much for joining me here in this conversation, and to the people who tuned in and watched this live stream.
Thank you, Smita. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Take care.